There's a lot of talk these days about the global tech race and what it means for economic security. But it's worth remembering that economic security is ultimately decided by what companies and workers do every day, how fast they adapt, how quickly they grow, how effectively they compete. And in this era of artificial intelligence, economic security is about more than just managing downside risks. It's about seizing opportunities. And so for American small businesses, the engine of the U.S. economy, how can they turn AI opportunity into measurable gains? Not just demos, but invoices, bookings, payroll, their bottom line. And for workers, both knowledge workers as well as those in the skilled trades, how do they convert this disruptive technology into an advantage, both individually as they navigate the labor market, but collectively as we compete around the world? And ultimately, how do we know if we are succeeding, both companies and workers? How can we measure in real time what's happening in the labor market? And how do we use official statistics plus private sector data to answer that question? We're going to delve into all of these questions and more with my good friend and LinkedIn chief economist, Karin Kimbrough. There are very few people with a front row seat into what's happening in real time with jobs, skills, and AI adoption. I'm Naveen Girishankar, and welcome to this episode of Betting on America. Karin Kimbrough, thank you so much for joining the Betting on America podcast. People don't know, but we actually went to graduate school together only a few moons ago. I am delighted to have you on the podcast, and just having seen you over your career and what you're doing now at LinkedIn is just really phenomenal, and really happy to see it. So thank you for joining.
Oh gosh, it's my pleasure. It's so great to reconnect. It's the beauty of LinkedIn. And I'm so in awe of what you're doing with this podcast. So thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with the big picture, because we want to get a sense from your perspective of whether small businesses and workers of various kinds can take advantage of the AI revolution that we find ourselves in the midst of. And you have a really unique perspective at LinkedIn. It's like a perch that very, very few people have, looking across sectors and geographies and companies of different sizes and different countries, really looking at this global talent marketplace. So let's start with the big picture, as well as the data that you look at typically to get a perspective on what's happening in the world and in labor markets.
Yeah, I mean, it's a true privilege to be here at LinkedIn and get to look at this data and try to make sense of it, because the data is just so comprehensive. It's truly real time. It's very granular. It spans 1.2 billion members on our platform who are sharing with us where they went to school, what they studied and got their degrees in, what jobs they've held, what industries they've worked in, where they are, where they promoted, how much they changed jobs or acquire skills, and all of that just kind of creates a mosaic of what's happening with workers in the market. And at the same time, we can see what employers are looking for by their millions and millions of job postings that they put on our platform. So a good example is we can see over time how exactly employers are changing what they're looking for in a particular occupation, whether it's a marketing specialist or an engineer or an economist. So that really allows us to kind of chart over time what's happening, but also at the same time see what's happening right now. And I think that it makes for a really fun picture. If I were to tell you what I see right now,
Yes.
The short story is hiring is still pretty much in a slump globally. There are some exceptions. I would say that hiring in India and Brazil and a couple of other really, fast developing economies with fast nominal growth rates, they're doing much better in terms of their hiring. There's a lot more dynamism. But if you're looking at Western Europe, you're looking at the US, hiring is slow. In the US, for example, we're now seeing the pace of hiring 20% slower than it was pre-pandemic.
Wow.
So it's really slow. And if I just look at this year, we're running about 7% slower than the year before. So we are definitely having a bit of a slump. We're kind of caught in this low momentum equilibrium, and we need to nudge our way out of it. And maybe tech is going to be part of that answer, but time will tell.
And that was something that was happening even before this year, or is this something that's happened really within the last year or so?
It is my opinion that what we're seeing in terms of the kind of slowdown in hiring that's been happening for a couple of years now, more than a couple of years, is really a macro-driven phenomenon and not necessarily attributable only to AI.
Right.
There's probably dual forces here, but I would say the predominant force is just an overhang of really aggressive hiring that
Right.
we saw in 2021 and 2022. And everyone kind of hired and moved around, and then everyone kind of sat in place, and essentially quits became very low. People weren't moving around. They were paid at salaries they were enjoying, so wages had gone up. And all of that just meant that the labor market kind of got locked into a certain point and stopped moving. And at the same
Yeah.
time, but remember, we saw interest rates ramping up really aggressively, in some cases like 500 basis points here in the US, in the UK, and in Europe. So that also slowed the hiring market in 2022. And this was happening before the introduction of things like Chat GPT and all the other generative
Okay.
AI.
Yeah, and the reason I also asked is because obviously there's a lot of discussion, particularly here in Washington, about policy volatility, uncertainty. I think a relatively erratic approach, in my words, towards the trade policy of the United States and what that means for the global economy. There's just also a lot of unpredictability, which has its own impact. I don't know whether you have a sense of how much of that is flowing through to the labor market. We hear a lot about how that flows through to financial markets, but is that flowing through to the global talent market?
I think it is. I think it is. Here's why. Uncertainty generally is kind of creates paralysis,
Yeah,
right? It makes you hesitant to make decisions. You might feel like you're waiting for more clarity or more data points.
yeah,
And when you have, whether it's a policy uncertainty, interest rate uncertainty, trade uncertainty, whatever it might be, you are going to find that decision making in some cases is a little bit more cautious. And I think what we're seeing now is a certain clarity around, I'll say, employers who are clear that they see AI as an opportunity, opportunity to enhance their productivity, an opportunity to maybe stimulate growth. And at the same time, they're wondering, what does this mean for the labor market? And that element of uncertainty is probably adding to a little bit of the, let's say, caution on the hiring front, because there's
yeah,
definitely caution on the hiring front. So I think that uncertainty is kind of gumming up the works a bit.
yeah. Well, that's very interesting because I want to take it from there to now small business and what it means for small business. Like you have been researching and talking about what's happening to small businesses in the U.S. economy for a long time. I think you've talked about them as the backbone of the U.S. economy. They drive growth not only across sectors, but importantly, they're important engines for growth, and what happens to them flows through the rest of the economy. So I'm going to actually use this as an opportunity to pull up one of the tables that I saw from your research, if I might, and just ask you to speak to it, and also just give us your perspective on how AI is flowing through to small and medium-sized businesses. And you see that on the screen, and now you're going to see you on the screen as you talk through this. What are we looking at here? And tell us what this means for small businesses.
Sure. So small businesses, I do believe, are the backbone of the U.S. economy. They account for more than half of all the workers and 90% of all the businesses in the U.S. And so they're a huge engine of hiring and growth. What you're seeing here is how are small, medium, and large businesses using generative AI? How are they embracing it? And what we're finding is that when small businesses do embrace it and engage with it, they are very much leveraging it for creativity and innovation. They're leveraging it to automate tasks, especially routine tasks. And they're also using it to kind of simplify their processes. And so writ large, they're some of the ones that are like most enthusiastic, believe it or not, but they may not have the deepest pockets, but they're most enthusiastic about embracing the potential
Yeah.
of generative AI. I think there are some headwinds there, but what we're seeing here is just all the different ways that we're seeing that usage show up.
Yeah, it's actually a fascinating picture that you're showing here. You know, it reminds me, we've been doing some work on trying to understand scenarios around how AI might flow through to the economy. And some people would say, well, it's kind of like the dot-com bubble. Others have said it's similar to the PC revolution. It will lead to some of these improvements through automation that you've showed here on this screen. And then still others say, like, no, 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 this is like a second industrial revolution. It will have structural changes to the economy. And obviously, we're not there yet. We're watching and seeing, and everyone's prognosticating. Do you have your own view on these stylized versions of how the future may play out and which one we're in?
You know, the easiest answer to say it's probably a little bit of all three. Like there are
Yeah.
times when we get ahead of ourselves or get over our skis in terms of what we think AI can do in the moment. But then there are other times, honestly, when I'm just like amazed at what it can do when I see the tools we have here at LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But what I would say from my perch is I think it has the potential to be a massive influence on how we work.
Yeah.
So I think it is revolutionary, but I think it's going to take some time. I think the adoption curve that we're on looks a lot like other adoption curves. They, you know,
Yes.
early adopters that race ahead, and then you've got a whole bunch of folks that are trying to figure out how to make it work and when to jump in.
Yeah.
I think in some cases, I actually think getting to that nirvana state we're all hoping, where it makes us suddenly way more productive and frees up time for creativity, I think that's still some years away. And I why. And some of that has to do with small businesses and their ability to adopt it. It's hard for them. It's harder for them to adopt it.
Yeah.
And we see, and they've got a lot of skill gaps as well, right? They have a lot of talent gaps where they're trying to hire for certain skills and they get outbid by companies with deeper pockets, or they're located in places where the talent isn't necessarily clustered. So there are a lot of headwinds for small businesses in this process. But my answer to you is, I actually think this is a massive change for the labor market. And we're going to see jobs redefined. We're going to see new skills emerge, new roles emerge. But I think it's just going to take some time.
It's great to hear that because, you know, a lot of times you hear about, oh, this is going to create massive disruption and job loss. Whole segments of the labor market would be out of work. At the same time, you're describing potential and new opportunities and skills that have not even been defined yet. And that's kind of similar to what we've seen in other technological revolutions in the past. And so I wonder if it's worth just remembering those moments when one is faced with these daunting, like kind of doomsday predictions. What's your thought on that?
I think it's true. I told you a pretty positive story about the art of what if. And, you know, in our own research, we think that eventually generative AI will unlock as much as, you know, 6 trillion in productive capacity worldwide. But you know, that's me saying over the arc of time, this is where we'll get to. We'll see if I'm right. But I think in the moment, as we go through this transition, there are lots of places where the transition could be really painful. A lot of people call that painful transition the messy middle, the point at which some people are finding their skills are not as much in demand. They're maybe anxious about how to reskill or upskill or learn the new things. And so I don't want to diminish the complexities of going through that transition, getting to that positive state I outlined. I do think there are challenges, and I do think policymakers have to play a role here, you know, to help figure it out.
Well, I'm glad you raised that because I wanted to go there. But I think you spoke recently at SBA and shared some of your insights. Could you give us some of your thoughts on what policymakers could be doing, or at least what we should be thinking about, especially in this town, about how to enable workers and enable small and medium-sized businesses through this technology revolution, whether it's skilling or other sorts of policy initiatives?
Sure. So I think I might have mentioned it earlier, but I'll just restate it. A couple of things that are really important for small businesses. One is the fact that they are, you know, searching for talent that everyone else is searching for. And there's kind of a shortage of that talent. Everybody would love to have a couple of AI engineers on staff, AI consultants, AI researchers. And these are some of the hottest jobs on our platform are people who have real AI expertise. You know, I think, you know, we can talk about it later, but there's just a massive demand for AI engineers. It's running
Yeah.
off the charts. And that's just an example of one talent gap that small businesses are facing more acutely than large companies that can kind of bid for that talent located in lots of different geographies. The other is that even if we agree, and I think we all agree that the demand for AI talent is outstripping the supply. So what do companies do? Well, they want to train the talent they have. They want to help that talent convert itself. That's expensive too. A small business may not have training programs and systems set up to, adroitly move people around through internal mobility to reskill and upskill them. And that's just an extra cost that small businesses may have. So there's a few hurdles that small businesses are facing. And then I think where policymakers can lean in here is really to help with the upskilling and the training. It's also, if I could say, in the background, I think the challenge of generative AI is going to always be around privacy, security, and trust, and ensuring that we all kind of feel that we understand how these tools work and that we have trust in them. That's been paramount for LinkedIn, is that your data is private and secure, and that you trust this platform, and we want to be trustworthy, and the people on it are trustworthy and validated and verified. And I think that trust is going to be an element that policymakers can help all of us lean into so that we can go for good, right? And for productivity.
That's great. In fact, I want to pick up one thread, which is the demand for skills that we're seeing right now. I'm going to pull up a chart here, which is one more of your research charts on the hiring rate for AI engineering talent. You have a front row seat on how AI is reshaping work and the workforce. I think you've talked in the past about the risk of polarization between high-skilled, high-wage positions, such as engineering positions, and mid-skill roles that will be automated or are being automated. I look at this chart here and walk us through this. This is like the demand for AI engineering talent.
So this is the job postings. And by the way, you'll notice that it's on the scale is very small. Like we're starting from essentially zero and growing rapidly. So I don't want to obfuscate that point, but you see this rapid growth in demand for AI engineers. And that's just one occupation. If I were to tell you, we're seeing a similar kind of curve for a lot of other AI occupations, believe me, that's the case. And so what's happening is companies are sort of trying to rotate what they're looking for. And we're seeing hiring, for example, of AI talent growing more than 25 to 30% year over year already. Yeah. So remember, I told you before, hiring is very slow. It's slowing. And now I'm telling you, no, it's growing 25% year over year. So there's a real demand supply gap here. Larger tech companies, are just basically able to compete for that talent, but smaller companies really are struggling. Yeah, and that's probably the biggest issue.
And if you played this forward to different sectors, maybe you have this perspective, or you're watching this. If I look at, say, financial services and the healthcare sector and some of these other sectors, do you see this demand being pronounced in some areas relative to others, or is this more or less economy-wide?
I think on the one hand, there are industries that are generally just doing better, whether it's for macro reasons or structural demographic reasons, and healthcare is exhibit A of that. It has been extremely resilient through the last 5 years that I've been watching this data. And a lot of that has to do with demographics and a pandemic, unfortunately, and a lot of other reasons, but also technology. But if you were thinking specifically about AI demand or AI adoption, what I would say is there is a horse race happening between industries, and not all industries are at the front. Okay. So tech and finance are clear early adopters of this technology, of generative AI tools and technology. In some cases, it is causing, I think, some change in what jobs look like. Yeah. So for engineers, there's an increasing demand for all engineers, but particularly AI engineers and network engineers, because those are the ones that are connecting the system and understand how AI connects to a stack or to the cloud. Yeah. But if you're talking about finance is also hiring a lot more folks with AI skills. Yeah. But it's a more regulated industry. And so the way they're doing it is different. So
Okay.
I kind of argue it sort of depends on the industry. It also depends on the country. If you were to ask me what's happening in Asia versus what's happening in the US versus UK, all three are doing it differently.
Yeah.
All three are doing it differently in terms of adoption for different reasons.
Right.
And maybe I'll stop there, but the point is it's really hard to just call it out as an industry or an occupation. It's sort of a mix of where you are, what occupation, and what industry.
Yeah, it's a good kind of cautionary note. Like policymakers should get quite granular to get a good understanding of what's happening. Because obviously there's the risk of misfiring. And I think it's something to track as this technology begins to flow through to different industries and different geographies. There will be a need for an approach to policy that's a little smarter rather than sort of a one size fits all, is what I gather the implication of what you're saying.
I think so, because the trends are all, I know I'm jumping in here, but the trends are all very different. You've had a whole narrative that's been going on for a while about entry-level jobs and that they're under threat from AI. And it is my view that entry-level jobs have had a really tough time.
Mm-hmm.
But the culprit is not necessarily AI. The culprit is the macro environment that has just slowed hiring overall. And it's also a US story. The entry-level story is not playing out, for example, in the UK. So that was partly why I was saying it really depends on where you are and what you're talking about.
Yeah. Can I just shift to another aspect of the AI labor demand story? I wanted to get your perspective on what you're seeing with respect to skilled trades labor demand, particularly in light of the massive AI infrastructure boom that we're seeing.
So, plus one to the point you're making about the distinction between skilled trades, craftsmen and craftswomen, and what you might traditionally call like the white collar worker sitting at a desk with a laptop. And this goes a little bit back to the point I was making about depends on the industry. If you look at hiring rates for certain types of jobs, they're still very buoyant. So if you are a master craftsman, a plumber, an electrician, welder, you are finding actually it's not at all hard to find a job. It's very easy. Hiring is happening for you. If you were a marketing specialist, you might say it's been a cold, long winter for a few years now. So it depends on the occupation. Part of this is that we're seeing certain industries that are really ramping up. So a couple of years back, a lot of hiring happening in what you might call the green skill space, utilities, alternative energy. Now it's just in like electric grid, building out plants, building out data centers, there's some expectations that maybe it's going to create even 1 million extra jobs globally by 2032 just for data centers. And data centers don't even hire a lot of people.
Right.
They're building so many of them.
Right.
And you need people who are going to like monitor the tech and correct the tech and reprogram it. Right. And so all of that is creating jobs that are relatively new and fast growing. So the infrastructure skills around data centers is one of the fastest growing spaces that we're seeing, in addition to, say, demand for quantum talent, green talent.
Interesting.
These are all edge cases, but they're growing fast.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, would you say that the U.S. is in the early innings of a kind of reindustrialization of sorts? Or is that too early to tell? And the reason I'm asking is I'm asking across chips, energy, data centers, and then some of these other technology sectors you mentioned.
I feel like there's been an increasing focus on our economic and industrial policy globally. And so it might be that we're at the early innings of like a new phase for America. I think we don't know how it's going to shape yet. I think it's early.
Yeah, there's one thing to hope for it. There's another thing to see what's actually happening. Yeah.
Correct. And I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing hiring patterns that are shifting around to very in-demand skills. And by the way, I'd be super remiss if I didn't mention that with all the demand for AI literacy, which is the fastest growing skill
Yeah.
on our platform, by the way. That's what
Yeah.
all the employers want. Even if you're not a tech talent, they want you to be AI literate as a project manager,
Yeah.
as an architect, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But so there's a whole demand for AI literacy, AI expertise.
Yeah.
There's also a huge demand for those human skills that generative AI isn't yet fully doing. So that compassionate leadership, the conflict negotiation, the having hard conversations, being a great leader, setting visions, all of that is still hugely in demand as well. So there's sort of a twin.
You mean ChatGPT can't do that for me?
I don't know. You go on there and see if it might be your friend, but I don't know if it can run your team, right? So,
Yeah. But I'm glad you
all that
mentioned that. In fact, I want to pull that up also. That's another chart that you have so much good stuff here. I wanted to pull up. Here you go, which is what you just said, the demand for AI literacy skills. And talk through this. You started on this just a second ago.
Yeah, so let me back up. Yeah, so on this chart, what you're seeing is like the demand for AI literacy skills. And that can be like, hey, I know how to use the programs in my particular domain that help me work faster, smarter, delegate routine data work. And every single occupation will have some kind of core generative AI tools. And so the fact that you know how to use them and you're efficient at them is that AI literacy. So we're seeing that demand just skyrocket.
Yeah.
What I was getting at was like there's always a demand for classic AI skills, like Azure, AI
Mm-hmm.
agents is the latest skill that everybody wants.
Right.
It's very technical, but the AI literacy is broad and
Okay.
it could apply to anything. And that's what we're seeing. So I kind of want to give people a little bit of hope that like
Yeah.
movement is building out your AI literacy over time, not feeling like you have to turn on a dime, but just get started and iterate, tiny steps.
That is such a powerful message. I was just reflecting on this. This is so daunting, at least for, I don't know, child of the 70s. It's kind of daunting, but then it's also very empowering because what you're saying is that we can all develop these capabilities and these skills. Of course, you'll go at a different pace depending on who you are and what you're trying to do, but it's available, it's possible. And I took it as a very empowering message. And maybe if you would comment on that, I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing is an evolution in recognizing that this is going to be a core tool, and not only in the workplace but in our lives. I mean, people who are retired are also using AI tools,
Right.
and it's figuring out what are the best use cases, where do we get comfortable with it, where do we trust it to
Yes.
delegate to it, and I think the anxiety that people feel is this kind of, again, paralyzing sense of, oh my God, AI is going to do my job. And I think where we need to get to is, well, parts of my job don't make my heart sing that
Right.
I could have
Right.
generative AI
Interesting.
do.
Yeah.
And when generative AI is ready to read all of my email, my heart will sing. That's my personal. It's already helping me organize it. But but we're getting there. But I think the point is how to make it work for you.
Yeah.
And it sounds easy for me to say that, like it's I'm just tossing that phrase out there. But I think that's where people just need to kind of play around with it. And you have to remember it took a while for us to get those desktops onto our desks when
Yes.
PC revolution happened. And it's going to take
Correct.
a while for us to figure out how to use generative AI. And it is going to take time. There is sort of a sense that we're rushing headfirst into it, but I think to truly get the benefits, it's going to be, easily a few years out before we see it.
Yeah. There's a lot of discussion about how China emphasizes diffusion. And at least some of our folks here have been focused very much on achieving AGI. But I think this conversation's kind of highlighted for me the potential of diffusion, but it depends on the power of individuals to take advantage of what's available, navigate the labor market, keep your antenna to the ground on what the skills are that are demanded, that it's not a top-down thing. It's obviously you need the aid of policy, but it's something that really is in the hands of us as individuals.
I do think so. And I also think that one of the things the US has that I really don't see in, I shouldn't say I really don't see, but I see less frequently in a lot of other economies is an incredibly, let's say, flexible labor market where people they can switch jobs generally. I mean, it's a
Yeah,
little tougher right now. I just,
right.
when I told you it's a much more competitive labor market for job seekers, that's
Yeah,
absolutely the truth. There's 2 times as many
yeah,
applications per role now as before. Um, but broadly, we have a very flexible labor market, and that is a wonderful foundation for growth and, adopting technologies and letting things evolve. It does mean that we have to make sure we don't leave people behind. I always need to say that,
yeah,
uh, and help them upskill. And that's where policymakers, I think, are really trying to focus on how is the workforce reshaping? How do we help that happen?
yeah.
But ultimately, our labor market flexibility is, I think, a core asset for the US.
Yes, yes. The dynamism of the system is something that has been time tested and stress tested, and it's something to remember. Speaking of which, I want to go back to the question of data. It's kind of the last big question that I have for you. There's been a lot of talk about the U.S. federal economic statistical system, and obviously we're in polarized times, so there's a lot of discussion about some of the recent changes that have been made. We're actually spending a lot of time on this, and we actually stepped back and said, what has happened to the statistical system over 200 years? And what was really interesting is that when you look at that, at every point in time when there has been a major national challenge, the US has invested significantly in both the integrity and in the innovation of its statistical system. And I think we probably face a similar challenge in the moment we're in now, the era of economic security and technology revolutions, right? But one of the things that is interesting, and this is my question to you, is that probably more than ever before, the private sector generates this incredible amount of data, real-time data, on what's actually happening in the world. And I wonder what more can be done to marry that with obviously the well-established statistical surveys that we undertake at the federal government level here in the United States. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel like this has been the last few decades have been the decades of like realizing the power of data, and the opportunities for private sector data to be additive to what we'll call the government data. And I do think we all will, have thought of the government data as sort of the gold standard. And by the way, as an economist who's worked abroad and looked at many website in other countries looking for their data, the US is the gold standard.
Gold standard. Yep.
Yeah. And so one thing I would say is I think there's a huge opportunity for private sector to be one source of information. Maybe it's the real time right now view of what's happening. And in our case, I would say, here's what I see in the labor market in terms of hiring, in terms of demand and supply and people moving around. But you can imagine it's happening for all types of companies that have data. And so the opportunity is how do we marry that and yet also know what it's not good at? Because not all data that I'm going to share is going to be good at every single thing. But I can be pretty darn sure that some of our data is a great real-time read on something. And so having that sense of what are the confidence bands around the data that I'm sharing and how to interpret it, I think that's a process we still need to figure out as a group.
Right.
And then maybe I would also just say that, when you think about the data that policymakers have, we do share our data with policymakers happily because it's all anonymous and aggregated. But they also are talking to business leaders and they're doing surveys. So there are multiple sources of getting data to help supplement the gap in public sector data right now. So I'm hoping that they'll use all of these tools to kind of create a picture.
That's great advice, great perspective, one that we'll certainly hope will be captured by the folks involved in this exercise now with U.S. federal statistics. This has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your time. Karin, this is, we should do it more frequently than once in 30 years.
stop dating me.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's been a
Strike
while.
that.
It's true. It's
Strike
true. It's been a
that.
while. It has been so great to be part of this. I hope you'll have me back.
Karin, thank you so much for this fascinating conversation. We will be watching what new research LinkedIn puts out. And thank you for joining this enlightening conversation with Karin Kimbrough, Chief Economist of LinkedIn. You can find this episode and more on csis.org, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Naveen Girishankar reminding you that everyone has a role to play in the tech race.